Welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Our talk tonight is healing in relationships. Well, there's a topic, right? I mean, we can go in multiple directions. There's a few couple of things that I want to go into tonight. And I'm Michael Dalton. I've been practicing bioenergy for over 30 years. And I've had the opportunity to work with many thousands of people, and something that comes up over and over for people is either being in relationships or lack of relationships. But on one level, we're always dealing with something around relationships, whether you're in one, whether you're not in one. But it's not just romantic relationships. In many ways, we have a relationship with everything, right? Like you have a relationship to your money or your finances. You have a relationship to your physical body and your health. You have a relationship with your family, with your friends. You got a relationship with your work and your work colleagues. So, relationship, there's so many types of relationships, but in essence, like the reason I say like relationships are so significant is because really we have relationship to everything. And one of the concepts in bioenergy is, healing is always about returning into a healthy relationship with yourself. It's like, it's always about coming into your center, finding your balance, finding your alignment. And, whenever we're helping people heal, it's always, when we look at like why people get sick, it's always on some level that they've come out of alignment, they've come out of alignment with themselves. And which is not uncommon, right? Like, because we're trying to match up with all the expectations that are on us and all of the pressures, and we're trying to meet everybody where everybody's at, and sometimes we lose ourselves a little bit in that. We get pulled in different ways and we lose ourselves a little bit. And healing is really helping people get out of their own way, coming back into alignment, and we would call it the initial relationship, coming back into right relationship with the self. The other two relationships are right relationship with nature and then right relationship with each other. So even the relationship that we have with each other, we put that as the third relationship. Your first one is your relationship to you. Your second one is your relationship to nature. And your third relationship is your relationship to each other. When we find this healthy relationship with ourselves, which really the premise of that is self-love, when we return to self-love and we come into a healthy relationship with the self, there's often a connection as well that gets established, that gets that reemerges within us, and it's our relationship to nature. And as we're connected with nature, and really I think in terms of, it's really about connection, isn't it? Like when we have a healthy connection to ourselves, we tend to make good choices, right? When we've a healthy connection to nature, we tend to make choices that are more in harmony with ourselves and others. And then, of course, then the third relationship with other people is somewhat easier when the first two relationships are in harmony. If we're in harmony with ourselves, if we're in harmony with nature, we're naturally going to be in harmony with other people. It is just like, it just makes sense, right? So yeah, it's such a big topic, but let's jump in. I'd love to start off with just like before we go into kind of relationships, and I think I will focus on relationships as the main focus of like personal relationships, as the romantic relationships tonight as the main topic. But we also have like relationships with animals, and I think, if only our romantic relationships could be as good as our relationships with our animals, we'd be doing really well. And when you think of like, I always think of like even like a dog, right? Like when you have a dog, the dog is always so happy to see you, right? The dog is jumping up and down, happy to see you. And even if you like go outside the front door and you're only checking the post, you only go out for a moment, right? And then you come back in the door, The dog comes running over, jumps up on you. I'm glad you're home. And literally you only went out the door for a minute, right? And I think it just really shows like how connected an animal is to themselves, to nature, to their owner. There isn't anything else going on for them. You left, they thought you were gone, you come back in, they're not, where were you? They're so grateful that you're back. Maybe the cat is a little bit more, where have you been? Where's my treats? But the dog is very much like, I'm so glad you're home. I think that's significant when it comes to things, because unfortunately animals really, their relationship with us is very much shorter than other relationships that we have, right? Like they live much like a fraction of our lives, and really maybe like they're only in our lives for like a tenth or something of their life, and it's almost as if like for dogs that it's like they get 7 days in one day, and it's like they live those 7 days in one day, right? And I think when it comes to us and each other as people, it's like things are very much like spaced out, and we feel like, oh, we've all the time in the world, and there's always going to be time, there will be time to fix things and resolve things. But if you notice, like with dogs, with animals, it's like they're not putting anything off. They're very present. They're very there. And I often think, like, even when a dog is alive, it's almost factored into their life. Like it's factored into their life that they're only going to live for a short amount of time. And it's factored into their life that they live almost like 7 days in one. So they're like every, instead of them maybe getting to 70, maybe they get to 7 years of age, or instead of getting to 100, maybe they get to 10 years of age. So they're really factored in to really live fully in a much shorter amount of time. And people always say, I don't understand why they have to go, and I think it's because they live so fully, and they really come in and really embody the present moment. And I think that's one of the I think beautiful lessons and stuff that you take away from having an animal is just this pure unconditional love that they have for you. And then we jump from there to human relationships. And it's like, it's up but down, it's in, it's out, it's good, it's bad, it's all the things. As I said, I've been doing bioenergy for 30 years, and I've treated a lot of people. And I would say, like, it's really not uncommon when people, the relationship with their work, because you have a relationship with your work because you like spend a lot of time doing it, right? Like, unless you're retired, but generally people spend a lot of their life in a relationship with their job. I mean, some people get divorced because they say their partner is married to their job and not to them, right? So work can play a big role in our life, and there is a relationship there as well. Like, I think when people are doing jobs that they don't want to do, I always say it can make them sick, So I think that just like we would want to have a healthy romantic relationship, we also want to have a healthy work relationship, right? We want to have healthy relationships with the food that we eat, right? We don't want to be eating processed food all the time. We want to eat healthy food, organic food, when we can get it, and real food, right? It's a very simple thing. So we even have a relationship with the food that we eat, but we have a relationship really with everything. And tonight, I was thinking in terms of like why relationships are evolving. And one of the concepts around that is that, when we get our influences from relationships, it's usually from our parents. How was your mother and your father in a relationship? How is your uncles and aunties? How the people that as you grow up, your siblings, what are their relationships like? And you start to learn, you start to model, basically. You start to model the relationships that you see, and then you start to play them out in your own life. And it's it's a really normal thing that the relationships that you see growing up, they imprint themselves onto your consciousness. And I think as life is always evolving and always like we're always growing in one way or another, right? Like, we're always growing because the reason we're always growing, I believe, is that no matter what happens to us in our life, in some way we're learning from it. I mean, maybe you're not learning from it and you're repeating the same stuff over and over, but generally, even when we repeat things over and over, it's to give us the opportunity to learn from it. It's to give us the opportunity to outgrow something. It's to give us the opportunity to integrate something. So in terms of like, as a collective consciousness, we're evolving, we're growing, we're becoming. What does that mean? Maybe it means we're becoming more conscious, we're becoming more aware, And then in terms of like, how does that apply itself into relationships? I think that we're becoming more aware. Like I would see it in terms of healing. I would see more people taking responsibility for the role that they're playing, right? Versus like, if you think in terms of like, say, blame, if someone is always blaming other people, they're not really taking personal responsibility. And I think that's a huge impact in the collective consciousness, right? So if you have a lot of people that are blaming everything outside of themselves, they're very much giving their power away. But then you start to notice, over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, people have started taking more responsibility for the role that they're participating in, or the role that they're playing in their life. And I think one of the things is that you're not actually your parents. I know we say, well, you turn into your parents, but you're not actually your parents. And you're also not alive at the same period of time in the same exact way that they are or that they were. So everything is like different perspectives and different time periods and different processes. So here we are going through our evolutionary process and then realizing, maybe the way people were communicating wasn't very healthy. Maybe there was some trauma associated with it. Maybe there was some even abuse associated with it. And we realize, hey, that's not what I want to bring forward, but maybe you've experienced that, or maybe you saw other people with that. Sometimes people, like a lot of times, will say when clients come in for sessions, they say they really want to be loving and happy and all of this in the relationship, but then anger comes up. Like this anger comes up and they're shouting at their partner and they don't know where it's coming from. And I would say, well, I know where it's coming from. It's coming from our wounding, right? It's coming from our childhood and our wounding, the unprocessed emotions. So the stuff that we haven't processed and integrated lingers around in our field. And given the opportunity, that stuff will pop itself up. It's kind of like holding a basketball underneath the water, right? As soon as you let go of the pressure, what's the basketball going to do? Right? It's going to jump up, right? And that's kind of like what, it's a good kind of analogy for the shadow self. So there's the conscious stuff that we process and we deal with, and then the unconscious stuff that we don't process or deal with, it kind of pops up when we don't expect it. And so on one level, you could be really happy and loving, and in another moment, you're like, where the hell is this anger coming from? And I would say that's not coming from the heart. It's coming from lower down in the body. It can be the root, the sacral, the solar plexus chakras. It's coming where we store old emotions from the past. And those lower three chakras are subconscious chakras. So they're they're not conscious chakras, or the subconscious part of the body. And so when stuff is stored there, we often aren't aware of, one, what it is, and what it even relates to. We just know we have anger, but we don't know what it's from, right? Because it's the unconscious part of ourselves. So healing, what is healing? Well, healing is always about helping us access the unconscious parts, release the wounding, and then return back into the heart. And that's why I kind of wanted to bring in this topic of healing in relationships and why relationships are evolving, because I don't think any of us are the same people we were last year. Never mind 2 years ago, never mind 3 years ago, never mind 10 years ago. And a statement that I like to use is, don't hold the person to the past. Isn't that beautiful? You could write that down. Don't hold the person to the past. And it's amazing how much we can do that without even knowing that we're doing it, without even realizing that we're doing it. Where we hold the person, our expectations of them, our belief in them, we hold them based on past experiences. And good or bad, the downside of it, I guess, is that people tend to live up to our expectations. And if we keep holding them in a lower expectation, they keep meeting us in that lower expectation. So not to say that it's our fault, but we also tend to co-create the same situations over and over, So in terms of bringing energy back into our center, I always think of like moving away from blame and moving into reflection, so reflecting, hey, what role am I playing in this? What part am I playing in this? And I really love that, because one of the things I've seen for years and years working with people in healing is that when people don't like go into reflection and resolve their baggage, even if they leave the person and find a new partner, they bring the same problems with them. Has anybody experienced that? Yeah, don't leave me hanging. But it's really not uncommon, right? Like that we want to get away from stuff. And so we move, even with relationships, we move away from people and we're like, okay, great, I'm done. And then you go into a new relationship and the same patterns happen all over again. And you say, oh yeah, I can't believe, but it's this person, the amount of people that come in for sessions and say, oh, I'd really love you to work on my partner. That's where all my problems are. I'm not kidding. Like literally people will come in and they say, oh, Michael, I wish you would work on my partner. They're really the cause of all my problems. Well, the thing is that if someone comes in for a session, that's the only person I'm working with. I'm not working with their husband or their wife or their mother or their father. I'm just working with them, right? Because they're the one who's presenting themselves. They're the one who's there, So I often find, people are often trying to fix or change their partner. And I guess I feel like I've gotten a good understanding of it over the years of like, what does it mean? And we're gonna talk about this tonight. What does it mean to be in conscious communication? And why presence is so important, and why presence is even the new currency in relationships. And so we'll break that down a little bit tonight. As I said, like I would say, relationships are evolving insofar as if you look at even in the last couple of years, one of the things that COVID did is it got people maybe at home with each other for longer. There's nothing like testing a relationship than either traveling together or spending more time together or being at home together. And you see, like, I know in my practice, I've seen so many people who have like relationships that have ended in the last 3 years. So like unbelievable amount of people. Has anybody else noticed that? Yeah, right. But in terms of like, in one way, relationships they're always coming and going, or, you hear some people and they're being married for 50 years and you're like, what? Wow, that's impressive, right? Like at the very least, you got to say that is impressive that you haven't killed each other after 50 years. It's quite miraculous, really. But in terms of like this next, what is it are we evolving into as a species, as humanity? And I would think it is that as we become more aware of our patterns and our parents' patterns, and as a collective, humanity is doing so much healing now more than ever in the past, healing on their own family's lineage, healing on the wounding, the trauma that has been carried forward. And so what comes with that, like what comes with all that healing that humanity is doing, is a raising in consciousness, is a more awareness of the role that they play and the role that other people are playing. And what also comes with that is healthy boundaries. The more healing, the more work you're doing on yourself, not only are you becoming more aware and more conscious, but you're also generally forming really healthy boundaries. I've often seen too, like as people receive healing or they receive training, that sometimes they realize that the relationship that they're in is really toxic, and that's a really interesting one. It's like, how did you not know your relationship was toxic? Right? You would think that everybody would know if they're in a toxic relationship, but really, like, everything is conditioning, programming, perspective. And if you don't love yourself, which is really the basis of healing, is all coming back to self-love. But if you don't fully love yourself, then when other people mistreat you, maybe they're just treating you in the same way that you're treating yourself. Right? So it doesn't seem that crazy. Like if you're treating yourself badly, then when other people treat you badly, you're going to be okay with it because it's so familiar. That's what you know, right? But here's the shift though, is when you start valuing yourself more, you start appreciating yourself more, you start loving yourself more. When someone starts to mistreat you, you reach a point where you're like, hold on a moment, that's not acceptable. So now when you start to value you, when other people don't value you, you realize it's not acceptable. And this is the mirror or the reflective process that we talk about in bioenergy, which is that people treat you the way you treat yourself. Isn't that an interesting one? People are treating you the way that you treat yourself. And so one of the ways in which the universe is always reflecting back to us, it's reflecting our patterns back to us. So as we start to like do the work on ourselves, we start to grow, we start to accept ourselves more, we start to love ourselves more, then how we treat ourselves begins to change. And then what comes with that is when you're treating yourself in a more loving, more respectful way, it's no longer acceptable for other people to treat you in a misaligned way, for other people to berate you or put you down, or it's like the moment you value yourself, you're not going to allow that into your life. Does that make sense? Right? And so that's really what I've seen through the healing, is that you never want to see healing break up relationships, but sometimes it's actually really for the better. Sometimes it's actually really good. Like if someone is in an unhealthy relationship, maybe they really do need to break up, or if someone's in a relationship with someone that doesn't want to be in a relationship with them, right? You might love someone, but maybe they don't love you anymore. I think personally, that's something that you need to know, right? Like it's an important thing to know, right? But in terms of when we start to value ourselves, we're really at that point in time. Now we're entering into a healthy relationship with the self. And I often think that that's really the journey of restoration, the journey of coming into alignment, restoration, balance, the journey of coming into conscious communication begins with ourselves. And so it's this return. I always like talk about the pendulum with it. We have our pendulum, and I always say, like, see, one of the things that often happens in relationships is we come in and we put our expectations or things onto each other, which is really normal. Like, everybody does it. That's what we do as human beings. We put our expectations on each other. But at the same time as that, and maybe I'm an idealist, but at the same time as that, I know that when we take all of the stuff away, we're in our center. And whenever somebody pushes something on us, what they do is they push us off our center. Now, if someone offers us something and we accept it, we stay in our center. So if two people have the same values, they stay in their center. But if someone comes along and pushes their values onto another person, and that person, because they get caught up in their romance and they get caught up in all of the energy of that, they allow it. They allow themselves to come out of their center. They actually don't even know that they're coming out of their center. It usually happens very slowly at first, and then picks up momentum over time. And before you know it, you've lost yourself. And I think I've seen so many times when relationships end that people really fall apart. And I've had to look at that over the years, because I've seen that happen so many people that, like, I'm always being really interested in people and why we do the things that we do and how to understand it, and in order to help people with their healing. And I think that when people lose themselves after the ending of a romantic relationship, I genuinely feel that they'd lost themselves beforehand. And so it's like the other person was propping them up, and so then when that person goes away, you fall down, right? And so it's like, if we're able to maintain ourselves in a relationship, then if someone comes or goes, we don't lose ourselves. And I know it sounds very idealistic, but I think it's actually, I believe it's more of an unconditional way of love, a higher level of love that is actually part of our actual natural nature, And if what we were doing now was right, there wouldn't be so many people divorcing. There wouldn't be so many people breaking up and stuff all the time. So there's something that's not right. Like, that's what I've had to look at, is like, it's the same, like, why do people get sick? There's causes behind it. Why are people always breaking up? Now, with that said, sometimes, like, a relationship has an expiry date, just like food, right? Like, you can have the most wonderful relationship, and then it comes to an end. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. These are more expectations we put on. We put on this expectation: I met you, we're in love, and we're going to be together forever, and we put that on the other person, right? And there's this expectation, like, well, if this is love and I feel like I love you, then we're going to be together forever. And I think that it's even possible for two people who love each other to end a relationship and still love each other. I think that if a relationship ends and you've had 10 years together, it doesn't take away from the 10 years that you've had together. That's just more conditioning and programming. See, people, because of their wounding, right? Because of the wounds, they make it believe that if it doesn't work out, then that they either made mistakes or that or they did something wrong. Like, so many people beat themselves up. I did something wrong. Absolutely not. I don't think that there's any right or wrong with any of it. I think it's just like it's part of the journey of life, you know, it's part of the journey of it all. And I think what I'd like to bring in tonight is just to offer some, I would say, like golden nuggets based on years and years of working with people, and relationships being a really big part of that, you know. One of the things about being a healer is that people come in and they share a whole lot of stuff with you, you know, and I would tell you, but I'm not going to. No, it's private. But in terms of like, but people tell you stuff that they don't tell anybody, you know. People tell you stuff they don't even tell their partner, you know. Sometimes I know they're breaking up with their partner before their partner knows, you know. I'm thinking, I think that's a conversation you really need to have with your partner. You know, it's like they should know, right? This is important, right? But in terms of as we evolve into deeper connection with the self, when we go into relationships, we stop losing ourselves and we stay in our center. We literally stay in our center. And so what I like to think of as, once we start to like break down, instead of like pushing things onto people, and it's not just in romantic relationships, this could be for anything. I think that whenever we push stuff onto people, what's the natural reaction that they have? Is they move back away, right? Like when you push, you know, it's pushing against them, right? Now, the other thing that happens is sometimes we pull people, we're pulling them into situations, and, you know, so whether we're pushing them into it or pulling them into it, like either way, either we're pushing them this way or we're pulling them this way, but what we're not doing is allowing them to be in their center. And whenever you take someone out of their center, it's only a matter of time before things come crashing down. Because all paths lead back to us returning back to our center. Because I think that that's the natural state of the human being, is to keep coming back to our center. And so as life goes on, you know, we pick up different challenges and pressures and wounding and all of these things. And I think it's also important that we're releasing them, that we're healing them, that we're letting go. Because like if you have a wound from a previous relationship, maybe something terrible, like say someone cheated on you. Well, that's going to be a wound in you, right? Like, I mean, I feel like we've all been there. I mean, unless someone has never had that happen. But I think for most people, we've all experienced that at some point, right? But in terms of like, you take a wound away from that, because there's some part of you that says, was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? And you start to maybe even blame yourself, which is, the idea of reflection is really, you know, you're not blaming the other person, but the idea is that you don't turn it around and blame yourself, right? The reflection is really looking back at the self and saying, okay, I have this fear of someone, say, cheating on me. So now I have this fear. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push that fear onto my next relationship. And so reflection says, rather than me pushing that fear onto them, I need to heal that fear, right? So that I can meet the person as they are, right? You know, so not push my stuff onto them and not pull them into situations that they don't want to be in. And so this reflective process and healing is really where the client is really looking at, what have they, where is their wounds coming from, and how are they bringing those wounds forward, you know? And so in terms of like, if it's fear, that's going to be the root chakra. And so a lot of times, you know, what basically undermines a lot of relationships is like lack of trust, right? Like people say it all the time, I don't trust this person, right? Well, here's a crazy idea for you. if you don't trust someone else, it usually comes back from you not trusting yourself. And, you know, we could do a whole class just on that one concept, but the quick version of it is, you know, you're probably still blaming yourself for choosing someone who cheated on you. And so that's the part of you that is choosing your next person, doesn't trust yourself to choose someone who's going to treat you in a healthy way. And so it's so interesting how these things get reflected back into ourselves. And so whenever we're doing healing for trust, it's always going to be like the root chakra. We're always working on the root chakra, clearing out the root chakra. And then when the trust isn't there, people can't move up to the next chakra, which is the sacral, the fun, the pleasure, the joy, but it's also the intimacy. So until you've healed your trust issues, you're not going to be able to have true intimacy with another person, right? And this links then in with, if anybody has had like emotional or physical or mental abuse in the past and they haven't healed it, they're going to bring that energy into the sacral chakra into their future relationships. So that needs to be healed. The sacral chakra needs to be healed of the wounding from previous trauma or situations that people have experienced. And then when that is healed, then intimacy can be, I would use the term connected, right? So you're able to connect with other people through intimacy. The next chakra up is the solar plexus. That's the power center. And so one of the things that happens for a lot of people in relationships is power struggles, right? So they're, you know, people say, well, like they're arguing all the time. Well, that's a power struggle, right? Like that's because here's a way, and I've shared this on a previous webinar, but I'm gonna share it again because it's so valuable. The reason why people shout at each other, the reason why people argue is because the heart is closed, right? That's why. When people shout at each other, it's because they don't feel heard. They don't feel that the other person's heart is open, but also their heart is not open, right? So that's why people shout. When people shout at each other in relationships or any time really, it's because they feel the other person is closed, but they're also closed, right? So here's another concept. If your heart is open, sometimes you only need to whisper and the person can hear you. Isn't that true? Think about it, right? Like when you're with someone and you're intimate and your heart is open, you whisper to each other. You're not shouting. You're not using your outdoor voice, right? You're whispering to each other because your hearts are so open that that connection is there and you're able to hear each other even at a whisper. You know, it even goes further than that. Like, I believe that when the heart is open, we don't even need to use words. There's an exchange of energy that takes place. That's a deeper level of intimacy, a deeper level of like tantric energy, where there is this exchange of energy that takes place between two people. And this doesn't even have to be romantic. This can also happen between friends, where your presence together between like two people, when there's a communication that takes place without words, without arguing, without shouting. And it's such a light whisper that the words aren't even spoken. And they just, it could be a look in each other's eyes, and that could communicate so much. You know, does that make sense? Right? And so, like, you know, sometimes in people's eyes, like our eyes are, they say the eyes are the windows of the soul, right? So, and I think that is true with body language, right? Like that we're always communicating how we feel, whether we realize it or not. We do it through body language. We're always communicating, you know, how we feel about situations we're in. And then equally, we're also picking up on it. And, you know, that's another form of communication as well, is body language. But in terms of what does this all lead to, I think it leads to conscious communication. And I feel like that's what's evolving right now, is that's what people are looking for. And what conscious communication to me is, conscious communication is our ability to really listen to each other, our ability to really slow down and communicate. I really think like conscious communication is when we communicate from love, when we communicate from the heart. And I think that when we communicate from the heart, people will hear it from the heart. But when we're communicating from our wounds, people are going to hear it from their wounds, unless they've done the work on themselves, right? If you've done the work on yourself, you're able to separate your wounds from another person's wounds. But when you haven't done the work, then when someone is like is sharing their wounds, it's going to trigger your wounds. And that's where I would say hurt people, right? People who are hurt the people around them, because they're projecting their wounds out as blame all out around them. And then that's activating other people who have their wounds, and everybody's getting triggered, right? It's like, it's a trigger society. Everybody's getting triggered and nobody's dealing with their fucking wounds, right? So for me, healing is always like, okay, your husband might be triggering you, but why are you getting triggered? What's your role in this? You know, not that he doesn't have a role, but what's your role in this? Because if you're the one in the healing, that's the one that we have to work on. So reflection is like, you're not trying to fix the other person. You're really just fixing the part of yourself that still needs healing, you know? And so I think this is the beautiful evolution that we're in right now, where I think that more and more people are coming into personal responsibility and seeing their reflection in things, and being able to separate, this is my stuff and this is your stuff, and being able to separate the two, you know. And we don't have to put up with people who are, you know, mentally or emotionally, physically or sexually abusing you in any way whatsoever. You don't have to put up with that shit, you know. But when you return to healthy relationship with yourself, it's no longer acceptable for someone else to mistreat you, you know. But when you are mistreating you, you'll be amazed at how much you'll allow other people to mistreat you. Why? Because deep down, you think you deserve it, right? Deep down, it's like, well, that's what you deserve. And when that heals, and that's why I say, I think collectively, the world has been going through massive healing in these last few years. And people are doing the work, right? Like people are doing their sessions and training and going and working with people and doing workshops and doing courses. Never has there been so much available to us now than ever before. Look at us here tonight doing a wonderful webinar and talking about this stuff. You know, did our grandparents and great-grandparents, did they have the opportunity to come and talk about stuff like this? You know, talk about intimacy and sexual relationships and like, no, you know what? Our grandparents probably didn't even talk about their finances, right? Like even finances, what you don't talk about money, that's a taboo, right? Why not? Money is one of the main reasons people break up in relationships. It's put down as one of the main reasons why people divorce is what is it? It's like money differences, you know. And it's like, I think that's really important stuff to know, right? Like it's important to know what your values are so that you meet someone else, you know, if you have the same values. Because if you have different values, it's not going to end well. It can't, right? So it's not about changing someone else's values. That's the whole point that I'm making. People come in, they know what their values are, and then they try to change the other person's values so that you meet each other in the middle or something, right? Or this idea 50-50, right? You both adapt your values and meet in the middle. I somehow think that that's wrong. I think that whenever we give up a part of ourselves to meet someone else's value, we lose ourselves. And whenever we expect someone else to give up a part of themselves in order to meet our values, they lose themselves. And so whenever we go off balance, whether it's pushing or pulling, the only thing that's ever going to happen is at some point that'll collapse and we'll eventually come back to our values, because that's where everything is always leading us back to our inner values, right? Just stop for a little drink of water here. This is from the beautiful Marde Hade. Marde Hade, thank you. Got a nice water bottle there. Water, so good. So let me see, just Crystal says, what to do, how to stay open, how to resolve this, sharing our wounds and triggering their wounds. Yeah. Thank you, Crystal. We'll get into that now in just a sec. We're getting there. We're making our way, you know. Thank you. So in terms of when I was talking about the values, I think that where I've seen people come in healing is that they're trying to change other people's values. And I think that it's really important that we really have to honor each other's values and honor each other's differences. And when we are really in alignment with our values, then we start to meet people who start to match our values. And I think that that's a much healthier way as society continues to grow and move forward. When people, instead of trying to meet someone and mold them into your values, when you're really in your own values, you're magnetic to meeting other people in the same values. And so when people come together with the same values, if I was to use a word, it's easy. It's easy, right? You know, and that's not to say that relationships are always easy, right? Like, but when you have the same values, the fundamental same values, it's so much easier together because you're in alignment with each other. There's no pushing or pulling. You can both fully be yourself, right? You can be your authentic self. Because if your values are not the same, sometimes you give up your authenticness to meet the other person. You know, that's what people do, especially in the beginning of relationships. They're trying to give the other person what they think the other person needs, and they lose themselves in the doing of that. So then if someone's already in a relationship and then you discover, hey, our values are not quite the same, you know, well, then I think in those cases, like, things can still work out, but you definitely need to get into the wounds and clear the wounds out, you know, because some of, like, when we have wounding, they distort our values, right? So they can distort why we value the things that we do. So whenever the wounds are taken out of the way, then we come back into like the authentic values that are deep in our heart. And so I think, like, you know, I've seen it over and over where people are in relationships and maybe it's not working out. They've been together forever, you know, they're at the point where, you know, they're kind of giving up and they don't see any hope or any way to make it work. And they've been spending time trying to fix the other person. And then, you know, as they go through their healing process and they start releasing their wounding without trying to fix the other person, this is the crazy part, without trying to fix anyone else, when they start to like heal, they start to change their own energy and their vibration. And when they change their energy and vibration, one of two things happens. Either the partner that they're with immediately starts to raise their vibration as well, and they raise together, or they move away. Because when your vibration increases, the lower and higher vibrations, they start to like get really fluctuate. So when we do the work on ourselves and we raise our vibrational frequency, either people will move away or they rise up to the challenge. And I think that people have so much capacity in them to rise to the challenge. You know, you don't know what a relationship is made up of until you've had a bit of suffering, until you've had a few challenges, right? And you come out the other side and you're like, wow, this person was really loving and supportive. You know, how would you know that if you didn't have some challenges, right? Right. So where does all of this lead to? Well, as Crystal says, how do we resolve this? Sharing our wounds and triggering their wounds, you know? Well, this is all leading to conscious communication. See, at the time of our grandparents and great-grandparents, if you were to bring up your wounding, hey, what you're doing is triggering me, right? You know, the level of communication wasn't very conscious. And people would row or argue, or they might even get into a fisticuffs, you know, and they like sometimes they wouldn't speak again for a year. They wouldn't speak again for 10 years or 20 years, or maybe they never speak again, you know, because they didn't know how. They didn't know how to resolve those communications. So conscious communication is where we're slowing down and we're actually listening to each other. And we're listening without trying to give advice. Oh, that's a big one, right? Because we don't generally do that. We don't generally listen to understand. Mostly we listen so that we can reply, right? We listen to a reply. We even cut them off so that we can reply, right? But to listen to understand. And one of the beautiful things to do when someone shares something with you, if you want to like end triggering, if you really want to end all the triggering and someone shares something with you, usually what that's going to do is if you have triggers, it's going to bring up your triggers and you're going to say stuff that's going to bring up more of their triggers, and it's like a fireworks, right? But if you can listen to what they say without giving them any feedback and just say thank you. There's a practice that we do, it's called dyads. And it's this practice where a person is speaking and you're not allowed to interrupt them. You're not allowed, you know, tell them what they're saying. You're not allowed like ask them questions. That they speak, and at the end of it, the only thing you say is thank you. Isn't that crazy? It's incredibly powerful. It's so incredibly powerful. Because the person, when a person gets to speak without getting feedback, without being judged, without being criticized, you know, then they feel, you start to rebuild trust. You start to build safety. And then the next time you do it, sorry, I wouldn't feel heard if someone just said thank you. Yeah. Crystal makes a really good point. You wouldn't feel heard if someone just said thank you. Yeah, you would have to do it as like I'm talking about like in terms of like a practice. You have to actually do it as a practice, right? So like you have to create context. So if two people are not getting along very well, you know, you could create a context that you're going to sit down together and you're going to talk. Not this old, we need to talk, right? And everybody's stressed out and it's like, you know, everybody's stressed out when someone says we need to talk. But in terms of like, if at the level at which we are, where we're able to communicate to each other, we can say, let's sit down and have a conscious communication. And one of the ways, like as I said, of doing that, like a dyad, would be where you actually arrange that you're going to talk about something and you're going to share, and you're going to go back and forth for 5 minutes each, and you're going to share. And at the end of it, the only thing the other person is going to do is say thank you. And we're only listening to understand each other. So it's all about setting up the context. I'm just sharing this as a concept of what conscious communication is. I'm not saying you have to do it, or you have to, like when your partner comes home and you sit down and say, now start talking, and then at the end of it you say, like, it's out of context, right? So that wouldn't make any sense. But our capacity, like, if you want something that you can do right now, the simplest thing that you can do is, when you're having a conversation with someone, put your phone away. That's the new level of presence, right? Technology is moving so fast, technology is just like speeding things up. Life is busy for everyone, right? There's so much going on, right? And we're dealing with all of these things in life that's going on, and then we're in relationships, and then we're dumping our stuff on each other or venting our stuff on each other. And it's like, sometimes it's like it's too much and people get overwhelmed. And so conscious communication is where the first thing is we just slow down, and we start to connect with each other through the eyes, through breathing. You take a few breaths together. Hey, let's breathe together. So we start to breathe together. We start to make some eye contact. You start turning the phone off, right? If you only did that and you didn't do it, even if you didn't talk, the very fact that you're making eye contact, that you're putting the phone away, that's going to start healing things, right? And then the context would be, why don't we have a conversation where we're sharing how we feel, but without giving feedback to each other? So really it's about, there's things that I need to say to you that I don't feel that I'm able to say. And so in terms of a diet, it's often done in a way of like, you're not like blaming the other person or telling what the other person did. You're really sharing how you feel. When you did this made me feel. So this is a way of communication where you're owning, you're not blaming them for what they did, but what you're saying is, I'm not saying you made me feel this way. I'm saying that when you did this is how I felt. And when we communicate in this way from the heart, it's transformational. It's amazing how when you speak from the heart, people listen from their heart. But when you say, you made me feel, that's from your wound, right? When you speak from your wound, make no mistake, people are going to get defensive. They're going to shut down. They're going to stop listening. They're going to blame you back. Well, you did this, that's why I did that, right? And so we go into this kind of the conflicting energy. So why is presence the new currency? Because presence is really all about coming into the now with each other. And really, when we come into that now present moment, it's sacred. It's really magical. It's really beautiful. It's really sacred. It's such a sacred place when we can just sit with each other and not even talk. The diet is just one form of conscious communication, but just being able to be together, two people, without being on their phones, that now is like, I mean, you walk by a restaurant and you see two people at a table and they're both on their phones, right? Who are they talking to? They're probably like texting each other. Have you seen the menu? Are you here yet? They're like typing away, right? Yeah, I'm here. Where are you? Oh, I'm sitting in front of you. Oh, I forgot I was on my phone. I know. So it's like, as Technology is amazing. Look at here tonight, all of us from different parts of the world, we're all here together communicating. How amazing is this, that we have the opportunity to do this? Technology is magical. It's wonderful. But there's also like technology inside of us. And what we crave as human beings more than anything else is connection. And when we're with each other in presence, when we slow down, when we connect, when we consciously communicate to each other, we feel that deep connection. And I think that that's that's the shift that we're in right now, where people are moving out of abusive relationships, where they're like, this is no longer acceptable. Now more than ever before. Maybe before they would have put up with it. Maybe your parents, maybe not even your grandparents, maybe your own parents, maybe you put up with stuff that your daughters and sons won't put up with now in their life. And that's the evolutionary process of relationships, that we're not putting up with the shit, right? Deal with your stuff, but don't throw it on top of me. I'll deal with my stuff, you deal with your stuff, and let's come together in union, right? And so at that level, when we're with people, if they do project their stuff on, you're aware enough to be able to say, hey, I think this is yours, not mine. Right? I think this is something you need to look at. I feel like you're projecting this onto me. Is it possible that that's true? You know, and when we speak from the heart, and we're able to create those spaces where we're able to reflect stuff back to each other, you know, and that's very different than whenever we like begin the conversation with you know, what do people do? They shut down because they're not able to process that. Now, in terms of like, here's another, just a different kind of concept for you, but there's a wonderful book called Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. And it's to do with the work of, I think it's Alan Pease, and it's from like 20 years of research into the differences between the male brain and the female brain, and the difference between the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. And one of the main differences, even when it comes to communication, right? Just like, we're not even talking about conscious communication right now, but just basic communication, that women have 6 communication centers on the left side of their brain, and women have 6 communication centers on the right side of their brain. Now that's 12 communication centers. I don't know if that's why women can generally multitask much better than men do, but certainly, you know, often a woman can hold multiple conversations at the same time and still understand what everybody is talking about. But with 6 communication centers on each side of the brain, if that was a road, that would be like a super highway, right? 6 lanes of traffic going that way and 6 lanes of traffic coming this way. Like, the level of communication, like on the woman's brain there, is 12 channels of communication. Now, just to clarify, and this is a scientific fact, men have not 6 communication centers on the left side of the brain, and not 6 communication centers on the right side of the brain. We have, on behalf of my people, we from Mars, you know, apparently you're from Venus and we're from Mars, but that's the work of John Gray. That's another guy. But the men have 1 communication center on the left side of the brain. One. Now, in terms of in terms of a road, like if women have a super highway on each side of the road, one road for a man is like a Canadian road with lots of four-way stops. When it comes to communication for a man, it's like a Canadian road with lots of four-way stops. Like, and it's just like one little road with lots of like different stops. No one knows who needs to go, right? Who do you go? No. And with Canadians, they always let each other go. So everybody just waits there, you know. But it's like in communication, this is one of the reasons why communication breaks down for men and women, because men and women think they should communicate the same. And nothing could be further from the truth. The brains are different. We communicate differently. And just even knowing this makes a big difference. And this kind of, if you imagine, right, that the male brain evolved from the hunter. So the reason why the men have one communication center on the left brain is to listen for instructions, hunting instructions. And also, like when you know, when a woman is sharing and communicating something that she wants to communicate, the man is only listening to find the solution, right? That's why women say, I don't need the solution. But that's all the man is listening for, to find the solution to the problem. And then once he's found the solution, he'll interrupt you to tell you, and then wonders why you're still talking about it, right? So these are like, we could do a whole class just on this, but there is wonderful books that go into it in much more detail than I could. But another great one is Why Mars and Venus Collide by John Gray. I know not everybody is maybe a big fan, you know, of Mars and Venus, men and women, and the communication, but you know, it's, if you give it a chance, it's like really beautiful work, and it's really smart, and it really helps you understand our differences. And as you begin to understand the differences, I think then we can communicate in healthier ways, in much healthier ways. And then with that said, I feel like even that is an old paradigm. The new paradigm, we're moving faster than that now, where we're moving into conscious communication. We're slowing down and actually taking time to connect with each other. And there's another wonderful book by Gary Chapman, The 5 Love Languages. Has everybody heard of that? It's a really good book. But he talks about the 5 love languages. And if you learn what the love languages are, and if you're able to identify what your love language is and what your partner's love language is, then when you're communicating to each other, you'll understand why sometimes when you do something that you feel is really beautiful, why they don't receive it, and vice versa. And then if you're able to figure out what each other's love languages are, then you actually really start to communicate on a much more conscious level, in a whole new way. So I'll just quickly share what the 5 love languages are. Acts of service is 1. Receiving gifts is 2. Quality time is 3. Words of affirmation is 4. And physical touch is 5. And basically, one of the ones that we're talking about tonight is quality time. It's presence. I think it's a really important one, because in a world that is moving so fast and life is so busy, doesn't it make sense that we really need to come back to spending quality time with each other, right? To really deepen our connections. Well, I've gone a little over time, so I'm going to wrap it up now. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening. And yeah, in a kind of like, I guess I want to say like that there's hope in all of this, is really what I'm saying. And there's beautiful hope in it, because I feel like that people are waking up to wanting doing the work on themselves and coming into relationships from healthier places. And when a healthy person connects with another healthy person, you go to a much easier, more loving level of relationship, you know. And that's our evolution. That's what we're coming into, is better conscious communication. And it begins with ourselves. And you don't need to like get out of a relationship in order to find a new one, to find, you know, you can, the work always, I always say, you know, the work is always to do the work on yourself now, independent of anyone else, right? If you're doing the work on you, the people around you will reflect that back to you. If you do the work on you, they'll do the work on themselves. But it's all a reflection. I'm just going to come back to some of the comments. Do you see couples like online session to help us in relationships? Thank you, Crystal. I do sessions on couples, generally not together. I generally like do healing sessions on that will clear out a lot of the emotional wounding or baggage. I don't do counseling as such. It's more, for me, it's more like I think that there's a spiritual solution to every problem. And that spiritual solution is more when we're connecting with the higher aspect of ourselves, that there is resolution in all of the challenges that we face. I think that the blockages or the wounding are personal, in that we have to, when we clear out our wounds, we're able to connect in relationships so much deeper than we realize we could. And I think one of the big things is, if you don't really love yourself, you're going to blame the other person for not loving you. But the real challenge is you can't receive love. You can't receive love from someone else if you're not loving that part of yourself, right? So this is why, like, I generally do work on the individual to do the healing. And then when it's crazy, so many times people think, yeah, but it's my partner. The moment you do the work on you, you realize the partner is just a reflection. So like in terms of that, I would say, yeah, you could work on both partners, but I wouldn't work specifically on each other at the same time together, but I would work separately. I hope that helps. Thanks for sharing, grand stuff. Appreciate you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, energy work clears core wounds. Absolutely. That's what the bioenergy healing is all about. I'm going to post my link tree here, and you can, there's a link there. It shows you my sessions, training, different offerings that I have. And if you're coming to this from YouTube, please check in the comments, and you'll find in the description, you'll find my link tree, and you can check out the work that we do. I'm going to switch off. I'm just going to say, this is the time where we put relationships back in the heart.